Hello, how are you? It's great to be back here again for another TOBI talk. And today I want to talk to you about the Bible and the Big Bang. You've probably heard a lot about the Big Bang over the years of your life, as I certainly have. And whenever you're talking with someone about the origins of everything, and all those deep and meaningful philosophical questions that people have, the Big Bang inevitably comes up. And I always used to, kind of be a little bit afraid of the topic of the Big Bang, or had a bit of trepidation. I always associated the Big Bang with negative things because it seemed that it was always atheistic worldview scientists that were talking about that. There was always people that were attacking the church that would talk about the Big Bang. So I had kind of associated the Big Bang as being a bad thing. And so for me, it was a topic to avoid. And I can remember years ago reading that someone had come up with an alternate theory to the Big Bang, and they had thought, maybe there's been many Big Bangs, or there were all these alternate theories. Whenever I'd hear an alternate theory, or I'd read that the Big Bang was so apparently debunked, I used to get real happy because I'd think, yes, we're done with that. And I felt like the Big Bang was just bad news. But I've got some news for you. The Big Bang's actually good news. The Big Bang's actually evidence for the Lord. The Big Bang's actually wonderful. And that's why today, for just a few minutes, we're going to talk about the Bible and the Big Bang. And I want to start by talking to you about a famous Belgian priest, Georges Lemaitre. And hopefully you'll be able to see him on the screen right now. This Belgian highly educated man, loved the Lord, and he was not only trained, in theology and the various things that you need to be trained in to become a priest, but he was also trained in physics and astronomy. And this is where we get the idea of the Big Bang from this man, Georges Lemaitre. Hope I pronounced it right, Belgian priest. And so Georges had been studying some of the information that was coming out in physics about the universe, and there was this thing called a redshift. It's kind of complicated and hard to explain, but because light coming from some stars seemed to be a different color red, they concluded that those galaxies were further away than others, and the implications of their various research were that they concluded that certain galaxies were actually moving away from the Earth. They were kind of like receding, going back. And Georges was the first guy to realise that the universe was actually expanding. So he worked out that, the reason the Earth is here and some of these galaxies appear to be receding, it's because the whole universe is actually expanding. And so he came up with the idea that there must have been a moment in time when the whole universe, if you reverse time backwards, the whole universe came right down to a moment in time and a place. A point in time and a point in space. And so that was a very, very profound realization. And so he didn't call it the Big Bang. He had some kind of fancy technical language for what he was describing. But basically, the implications of this were that the universe had a beginning. It had a beginning in time, and it had a place where it began. There was a moment when the universe didn't exist, and then a minute later, except to say it, that is kind of funny because time didn't begin until the universe began. So you couldn't really say a minute later because there was no such thing as a minute. But the next thing that happened was the universe was there. And so this sounds a great deal to me like what the Bible describes in Genesis 1, chapter 1. Where it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. 1 minute, there was nothing, and the next minute God speaks, and out of his mouth, words that come out give power to all things, and suddenly a universe is created from nothing. And the implications of this are huge, because it was quite common even for people like Einstein. And a few minutes ago you saw that photo of Georges Lemaitre. Now he was, I probably should have mentioned it, he was the man standing in the middle. you would have recognised Albert Einstein standing to the side. And on that particular occasion, this was about 3 years after George came up with the idea of the Big Bang, and he was visiting somewhere, and I think it might have been the United States, and he was giving a lecture on it, and you can see in the photo where he met with Einstein. Einstein was a little bit troubled with this idea because there'd been a long-standing belief that the universe was eternal, like it never had a beginning. And that really played into the hands of, you know, secular atheists and secular scientists and people with an atheistic worldview, because if the universe was eternal, in other words, if it was just always there, then you didn't need there to be a God. If the universe itself would be kind of like God. But if the universe had a beginning, which this discovery proved it did, then you needed a God. You needed something that was eternal, otherwise nothing would exist. And if you think about the implications of that, nothing can exist unless something creates it, or otherwise something itself must be eternal. And so the fact that the universe exists at all is proof to us that there is something of eternal quality out there. And of course, when God spoke and he said, "Let there be light," and the universe sprang into being, he created the heavens and the earth, what we had there was the beginning of time, and the beginning of space, and the beginning of matter. And because God created those things, it means he himself was not a part of the creation. He's outside of the creation, and of course that means he's not made of matter, he's outside of space, and he's outside of time. So the creator of the universe is, by very definition, eternal. He's omnipresent, he's everywhere, because he's created everywhere, but he's outside of everywhere, so he is everywhere. And when you go to Bible college and you're learning about God, you're learning about theology, and you learn that God is omnipresent, he's everywhere. Well, the Big Bang shows us that God's everywhere. At Bible college we learn that God is omniscient, he knows all things. Well, the Big Bang shows us that too. We learn that God is all-powerful, omnipotent. Well, we see that God, in his process of creating everything, he's all-powerful. But we learn one more thing from the Big Bang too. We learn that God is eternal because he's outside of time. There are no beginnings or endings except for that God has created beginnings or endings. I find that whole thing so fascinating. It's just like what the scriptures say in Revelation. It says, "From the foundation of the world, Christ was crucified." And we think, wow, God, from that moment of creating everything, because he was outside of time, he already could perceive what he was going to do, and he had already planned to do it. Because he was outside of time, he could see all of time in one go. Imagine, you know, you go and you watch a football game, and then you go home and you've got the tape, you've got it recorded, and you've got the whole game there before you, and you kind of like know what's going to happen. Well, God just knows everything that was going to happen, and he was able to plan, and he was able to work himself into it. And so we've got an expanding universe because there was a moment in time it began, and ever since then it's been expanding. And in Isaiah chapter 51 verse 13 it says this, "Have you forgotten the Lord your Maker, who stretches out the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth?" There's actually 17 places in the Old Testament where it talks about the Lord stretching out the heavens. Some of them it says he's doing it, he's stretching out the heavens. Some of them says he stretched out the heavens. In other words, he did it in the beginning, stretched them out, but he's still stretching them out. The scriptures are showing us that all along it knew that the handiwork of the Lord was at play. In Psalm 19 verse 1 it says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands." As Christians, the Big Bang is wonderful news because it proves that everything had a beginning, which is just what the Bible tells us it does. It proves that everything came from nothing, which is astounding. And everything, of course, means everything. I mean, this stand that my notes are being held on, my notes themselves, the trees that the notes got made of, porcupines and echidnas and butterflies, a giant universe far bigger than we can imagine. It all came from nothing. A dot that suddenly expanded into everything. Incredible. It proves that time and space had a beginning. It proves that God himself is not of time and not of space. In other words, he is eternal. All the things that the Bible says about him. And it shows that because there's a creation, there is a creator. Romans chapter 1 verse 20 says, since the creation of the world, since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, his divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from his workmanship, so that men are without excuse. If people stop and actually think about the beginning and the big bang, it's very, very hard for anyone to refute that there must have been something of an eternal, omnipotent nature that got it beginning. And that's because that's the truth. And that's what it tells us here in Romans 1:20. So I'd like to say, even though I'm certainly not a physicist, I'm not an expert at astronomy, I do definitely love the Bible and I love reading about those things, but it's really clear to me that the Big Bang is not evidence against God, it's evidence for God. The Big Bang is a big blessing to all Christians. So next time you're in a conversation with someone and they're talking about the Big Bang as though it's great evidence against God, you just have to start asking the why questions and asking some of the questions behind it to show them that actually the Big Bang is great evidence for what the Bible has said all along as being the truth. There's a lot of great people who talk on this subject. Stephen Meyer and John Lennox, there's some great lecturers online. You should take some time and listen to them and expand your mind to see that the more that science uncovers, the more it shows us that the Lord is our God. So we thank God for people like George Lemaitre, Belgian priest, who discovered the Big Bang. What a blessing it's been. And we thank the Lord our God. And thank you for listening to this TOBI talk today. And just ask the Lord would bless you and give you grace. Until next time.